My name is Sarah Marshall, and I am 28 years old. 5 years ago, my family told our entire hometown that I was a thief, a drug addict, and an ungrateful daughter who abandoned her own blood in the middle of the night. They made the lie so loud, so airtight, that every old friend, every teacher, and every neighbor on Birch Lane turned their faces away when I passed. For 5 years, I was a ghost in the place where I grew up, completely erased by a narrative my parents built to protect themselves. Then last Tuesday, our quiet, 70-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Vance, walked into the county clerk's office with a leather folder clutched against her cardigan. She didn't look at the cameras, and she didn't ask for permission. She simply submitted a formal, sworn affidavit detailing exactly what she saw through her living room window on the night of October 14th, 2021. And when the stamps hit that paper, a 5-year tower of deception completely unraveled under the cold, fluorescent lights of a public record. Before we get into the exact details of that night, and what my family did when the truth caught up to them, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly earns it. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I like knowing who is listening from the dark. Now, let me take you back to the fall of 2021, to a 2-bedroom house in Millfield, Ohio, a town where the local hardware store still carries paper receipts and the neighbors know your name before you even introduce yourself. Growing up in the Marshall house, there was a very specific architecture to our lives. My father, Richard Marshall, was a man whose entire identity was built on the phrase *appearances and obedience*. He ran a building supply store downtown, a business that had been losing value for a decade, though he would rather set fire to the building than admit his ledger was bleeding. My mother, Denise, was a woman of practiced smiles and sharp, calculating glances. She valued family loyalty the way a crooked accountant values a second set of books, not out of love, but out of a desperate need to hide the structural failures. And then there was my younger sister, Kelsey. Kelsey was 3 years younger, blonde, and naturally performative. She came out of the womb knowing how to hold court at a dinner party, how to look like a victim when she was caught in a lie, and how to ensure my parents' attention never wavered from her. If Kelsey won a regional trophy, it was framed on the mantelpiece before the weekend was over. When I won the district science fair, the ribbon stayed in my backpack until the ink on the certificate faded. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't difficult. I was simply the daughter who was expected to adapt quietly while the rest of the house performed. By the time I was 23, I had working student loans, a nursing degree from the state university, and a position at the community clinic on Route 9. I built that life with my own hands, brick by brick, while sharing a bedroom wall with a household water heater. I didn't complain because I figured that as long as I kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed out of the way, the truth of my worth would eventually be undeniable. I was wrong. In that house, being quiet didn't mean you were safe. It just meant you were the easiest foundation to pour a lie onto. The real breakdown started in June of 2021. My mother's brother, Uncle Wade, was a real estate agent who moved through the world like a man trying to sell a house with dry rot before the inspector arrived. He and my father were always disappearing into the garage with folders, packing the concrete, talking in low, urgent voices about development lots, bank debts, and lines of credit. I didn't pay attention to their business until the day my grandmother, Sylvia, passed away. Grandma Sylvia was the only person in that entire family tree who ever truly looked at me and saw a person. She lived in an old lakefront cabin out at Cedar Lake, surrounded by white pines so tall they blocked the afternoon sun. The porch sagged, the screen door didn't latch right, and the air smelled like wood smoke and old books. Every Saturday morning during my college years, I would drive out there in my used Honda, patch her screens, clean her gutters, and sit with her while the lake turned gold. "Patience isn't weakness, Sarah," she told me one afternoon while we were organizing her bookshelves by color. "It's timing. Some people focus so much on the price of a place that they forget what makes it valuable." She died on a gray Tuesday in September. At the reception, while the folding chairs were still sinking into the damp lawn, I caught my father and Uncle Wade standing by the dessert table. Wade had a manila folder tucked under his arm, and his voice was lighter than it had been in months. We should move on this before probate gets complicated, Wade whispered, tapping the folder. The Cedar Lake lot alone is worth $450,000 to Ridgeline Development. If we clear the title, we pay off the store's debt and handle the bank. I stepped closer, my glass of water cold in my hand. Grandma wanted the cabin to stay in the family, I said quietly. She told me that since I was 12. My father turned around slowly. His face was a mask of grief-stricken authority, the look he used whenever a customer questioned a bill at his store. Your grandma was emotional at the end, Sarah, he said, his voice flat and arctic. This is business. Business is what pays the property taxes. Don't speak about things you don't understand. 3 weeks later, the bomb dropped. I came home from a 12-hour shift at the clinic to find a glossy flyer on the kitchen counter, half hidden under a grocery list. It was from Ridgeline Development, lakefront lots, premium prices now acquiring. In the margin, in Uncle Wade's sharp, aggressive handwriting, was a phone number and a note. Title clean by October 15th. Closing contract ready. My stomach dropped. October 15th was less than a month away. They hadn't even finished the probate process, yet Wade was already guaranteeing a clean title to a major commercial buyer. That night, I went up to my bedroom and pulled out a small wooden box Grandma Sylvia had handed me 2 years before her health started declining. Keep this safe, she had said, her papery fingers pressing into my wrist. Don't open it until someone tells you that sentiment doesn't pay taxes. Inside the box was a single business card for Margaret Caldwell, an attorney at law downtown. Below her name, printed in small, precise type, were 3 words that changed the gravity of our entire house. Tramaine Family Trust **. I called the number the next morning from the clinic parking lot. Margaret Caldwell answered on the second ring, her voice steady, professional, and entirely unbothered by the name Marshall. When I told her who I was, she paused. Sarah, she said carefully, I've been waiting for you to call. Your grandparents hired me 6 years ago to establish an irrevocable trust. The cabin, the land, and a small investment portfolio were transferred while they were alive. Legally, it never entered their personal estate. It doesn't go through probate, and your father has no claim to it. You are the sole successor beneficiary. I sat in my car, the steering wheel hard under my hands, feeling the world tilt. Does my father know? No, Margaret said flatly. Your grandfather's exact words to me were, my sons will sell that cabin before the funeral flowers wilt *. He didn't trust them with it, but he trusted you because you were the only one who asked if the roof needed patching before you ever asked what the place was worth. She told me that someone had been making aggressive inquiries at the county recorder's office about the title. Uncle Wade was trying to file an affidavit of heirship to bypass the probate loop and record a quitclaim deed to transfer the cabin to himself and my father. If he files that paper, it creates a cloud on the title, Margaret warned. It won't give him ownership, but it will tie the property up in court for a year or more, and Ridgeline will pull their offer. You need to sign the formal acceptance of successor beneficiary documents immediately to freeze the chain. The deadline was set for October 14th. On the evening of October 14th, 2021, the air in Millfield was thick with rain. I had an appointment with Margaret Caldwell at her office at 8:00 p.m. to sign the legal paperwork. I packed my laptop and a small folder of personal documents into my bag, intending to leave straight from the house. When I came downstairs at 7:15 p.m., the kitchen was dark, but the fluorescent light in the garage was buzzing through the cracked door. My father and Uncle Wade were standing over a folding table, a bottle of bourbon between them, and a single sheet of paper laid out flat. Wade, are you sure about the notary stamp? My father asked, his voice low and tight with an anxiety I hadn't heard before. If the recorder catches this. The recorder doesn't check stamps at 9:00 a.m. on a Friday, Richard, Wade snapped, his thumbs typing furiously on his phone. The quitclaim is ready. We record it tomorrow morning, Ridgeline signs the closing papers by Monday, and the bank gets their $180,000. Your store stays open, and the girl gets $50,000 for college. Everyone wins. What about Sarah's bag? my mother's voice cut in from the shadows near the washing machine. I went through her things while she was in the shower. She has a card for a lawyer named Caldwell. She knows something. I stood in the hallway, my fingers digging into the strap of my nurse's bag, my chest so tight I couldn't breathe. My own mother had gone through my bag while I was in the shower. They were planning a forgery dressed up as an inheritance transfer, and they were counting on me being too young, too quiet, and too isolated to stop them. I didn't open the door. I didn't yell. I walked straight out the front door, got into my Honda, and drove through the sideways rain to Margaret Caldwell's office. Under the warm desk lamp of a small, paper-scented room downtown, I signed my name in ink. "It's done," Margaret said, stamping the acceptance form with a heavy black seal. "First thing tomorrow morning, I file a list pendants notice against the parcel. Your uncle's quitclaim will be automatically rejected on chain of title grounds. The cabin is yours." I drove back home at 11:30 p.m., the rain still pounding against the windshield. I thought there would be a fight. I thought we would sit at the kitchen table and I would say, "Dad, I know what you did, and the cabin is locked." But my family had already written a different script. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark, but my father was standing on the front porch, his arms crossed, his work boots kicking a loose piece of trim. Beside him were 2 black garbage bags, taped at the top, glistening in the rain. "Don't bother badging in," he said, his voice carrying that boardroom authority that now felt completely hollow. "Your mother told me about the lawyer. You went behind our backs to steal from this family. You want to handle your own affairs? You can do it under someone else's roof." "Dad, Uncle Wade is trying to file a forged notary stamp," I shouted over the wind, my voice breaking for the first time. "The property is held in a trust. Grandma left it to me." "Enough," my mother yelled, stepping onto the porch behind him, her face blotched with performative fury. "You are an ungrateful, selfish girl, Sarah. You've embarrassed this family enough. We are cutting you off. Don't call this house, don't email your father, and don't look for us when you're on the street." They went inside and turned the deadbolt. Then the chain. Then the porch light went out, leaving me standing in the dark grass with 2 garbage bags of clothes and a Honda with a 1/4 tank of gas. I didn't know it then, but while I was loading those bags into my trunk, my sister Kelsey was already typing a message to our neighborhood group text. Within 48 hours, the narrative was cemented in Millfield. Sarah Marshall stole $40,000 from her father's store ledger, ran away with a drug addict boyfriend, and cut off her grieving parents because she couldn't handle the truth. They flipped the entire story. My father's business failure became my theft. Their eviction of a 23-year-old nurse became my abandonment. For 5 years, I stayed away. I didn't call because my number was blocked within 48 hours. I sent 2 emails with the trust documentation attached. They went unanswered. I wrote a priority letter. It came back stamped return to sender unopened in my mother's handwriting. I moved to the next town over, took extra shifts at a level 1 trauma center, lived on cafeteria leftovers, and built a life out of the wreckage. I married a man named Nathan, an attorney who listened to my story without flinching and told me I deserved better. We built a home, adopted a dog, and kept the door to the past surgically closed. But a town like Millfield doesn't let a story die. The lie grew load-bearing walls. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, my sister performed the role of the grieving sibling, telling cousins at church that she had begged me to come home, but that I hated them. Then, present day, January. Uncle Wade, now desperate as Ridgeline Development pursued him for breach of contract and a $45,000 penalty, decided to make one last run at the Cedar Lake title. He filed a formal civil challenge to the trust, alleging that I had used undue influence on a dying grandmother to isolate her from her sons. They were demanding 50% of the estate, or they would freeze the property in litigation for years. They thought they had me backed into a corner. They thought 5 years of public shame would make me settle, make me hand over the cabin just to make the whispering stop at the local grocery market. They completely forgot about Mrs. Evelyn Vance. Mrs. Vance had lived across the street from our house on Birch Lane for 40 years. She was a quiet woman who kept her lawn immaculate, smelled like lavender hand cream, and spent her evenings reading by her living room window. My family never noticed her. To them, she was just part of the background, an old lady who didn't matter because she couldn't help them maintain appearances. But Mrs. Vance had a long memory, a sharp pair of eyes, and a filing system. Last Tuesday, when the news of Wade's lawsuit hit the local legal filings, Mrs. Vance didn't call my parents. She called Margaret Caldwell, and what she put in her sworn affidavit didn't just challenge my father's version of events, it detonated it frame by frame. The county clerk's office was completely silent when Margaret Caldwell slid Mrs. Evelyn Vance's sworn affidavit across the counter. The document didn't just summarize a neighbor's perspective. It was a pixel-level, time-stamped record of the exact sequence of events on the night of October 14th, 2021. In the affidavit, Mrs. Vance stated under penalty of perjury that she had been sitting by her front window at 11:20 p.m. due to the severity of the rain. She testified that she watched my father, Richard Marshall, carry 2 black garbage bags out to the front porch. She documented that my mother, Denise, stood in the doorway shouting, and that when I pulled into the driveway, my parents forcefully locked the deadbolt and the chain, ignoring my pleas over the wind. Most damaging of all, Mrs. Vance noted that my sister, Kelsey, was standing at the second-floor window holding a glowing phone, watching me struggle in the dark before stepping back into the shadows. But Mrs. Vance hadn't stopped there. Her affidavit included copies of her own personal security camera logs from that night, footage my family never knew existed because her camera was tucked discreetly beneath the eaves of her porch, aimed directly across the street. The digital timestamps matched the legal logging of my successor beneficiary, signing down to the minute. The architecture of their 5-year campaign was cracking in real time. They had told the town I ran away in secret after committing a crime. A public record now proved I was systematically locked out and abandoned by my own blood. When Uncle Wade received a copy of the affidavit from Margaret's office, the rising tension in our family home turned into a full-blown crisis. He called my father from his real estate office, his voice stripped of its usual boardroom confidence. I know this because my Aunt Grace, my father's younger sister and the only person who still treated me fairly, was visiting the house to collect an old sewing machine and heard the entire phone call echoing through the thin garage walls. "Richard, we have a massive structural problem," Wade hissed, packing the concrete floor. "The neighbor has logs. If that video gets entered into the civil discovery record, the DA's investigator is going to pull the quitclaim deed we tried to file. They'll look at the notary stamp from King County." "Wade, you told me the stamp was clean," my father replied, his voice rough, gravelly, and entirely emptied out. "I assumed nobody was watching, Richard," Wade shouted back. "If Ridgeline Development sees a cloud on this title backed by a sworn witness statement, they aren't just going to pull the $450,000 offer. They're going to enforce the $45,000 breach of contract penalty clause and sue me for misrepresentation of ownership. I'll lose my real estate license before the month is over." My father didn't defend him for 30 years. Richard Marshall had been a man who never faltered, never apologized, and always used his temper to decide what was true. But standing in that garage, facing the physical evidence of his own passivity and deception, his pride began to crumble into concrete dust. The betrayal within the house was deepening, and the load-bearing walls of their perfect narrative were giving way. That same evening, my mother had an absolute emotional breakdown in the kitchen. Aunt Grace watched as Denise sank into a chair at the mahogany table, the same table where they had sorted through my grandmother's personal files while the funeral flowers were still fresh. My mother clutched her Cartier bracelet, her face chalk white, her mascara bleeding down her cheeks in thin, dark lines. "What have we done, Richard?" she whispered, her voice high and thin, the practiced composure completely gone. "Every neighbor on Birch Lane is talking. Nora Beckett saw Wade walking the lot lines with a measuring tape last week. People are putting the pieces together. If the church board sees that affidavit, if the community finds out we threw her out in a hurricane." "Shut up, Denise," my father snapped, but his hands were trembling as he poured bourbon into a glass. We stayed the course for 5 years. We didn't make trouble. Sarah made trouble when she hired a lawyer. She didn't make trouble, Richard. She kept a promise. Aunt Grace cut in from the doorway, her voice tight with fury. You erased your own daughter because loving Wade's money was easier than admitting your store was failing. You let Kelsey broadcast a lie to 47 people in this town while Sarah was working 12-hour shifts and crying in supply closets. My mother covered her face and sobbed, not out of remorse for what they had done to me, but out of absolute terror for their public reputation. To a woman like Denise Marshall, the truth wasn't a moral failing. It was a public humiliation she couldn't control. This was their dark moment. My sister Kelsey locked herself in her bedroom upstairs, refusing to answer calls, her phone buzzing constantly as old-school friends sent screenshots of the civil filing index. The town didn't know every detail yet, but they knew enough. The version of the story that had circulated at the local diner and the grocery checkout lane for 5 years was showing its seams. They were sitting in a dead house, counting the days until a judge forced them to open their books. But inside me, the exhaustion was turning into a very different kind of clarity. I was done floating. I had spent 5 years being the daughter who disappeared, the underdog who accepted the silence because she thought patience would win the war. On Wednesday morning, sitting on the kitchen floor of my home with Nathan, a plan began to form. It wasn't a scheme for revenge. It was an architecture of absolute justice. They want to contest the trust on grounds of undue influence, Nathan said, setting his coffee mug down carefully in his lawyer voice. An irrevocable trust established 6 years before death by a mentally competent grantor, witnessed and notarized properly, is completely airtight. We aren't going to negotiate, Sarah. We aren't going to offer a buyout or a settlement to make them go away. I don't want their money, Nathan, I said, my voice level and steady, the voice I used during a code in the trauma bay. And I don't want to hide anymore. If they want a real conversation about ownership, we are going to have it in the most public, legally binding space available. I called Margaret Caldwell and instructed her to reject Uncle Wade's settlement proposal out of hand. We filed a formal cross-motion demanding a mandatory face-to-face deposition of Richard, Sandra, and Wade Marshall under oath, to be recorded by a certified court stenographer. Additionally, we attached a copy of Mrs. Vance's affidavit and the security video logged directly to the public motion file. Anyone with an internet connection and a county portal account could read it. I wasn't asking for their permission to clear my name. I was setting the terms, the deadlines, and the boundaries. If my father wanted to maintain that he was the rightful heir of Cedar Lake, he would have to say it under penalty of perjury, with a camera running and a witness statement sitting on the desk between us. The turning point had arrived, and the protagonist was rising. I checked my nurse's badge, smoothed the lapel of my gray blazer, and looked out the window at the morning light. The deadline for their response to our deposition mandate was 48 hours away. They thought they could use 5 years of shame to make me bend. They didn't realize that when you burn down a girl's foundation, the only thing left standing is the steel. The climax began on a Friday morning, exactly 72 hours after we submitted our cross-motion. The deposition was set to take place in the main conference room of Caldwell and Associates downtown. I arrived early, walking through the glass doors with Nathan by my side. My name was on the chart as the primary property owner, and my spine was completely straight. At 9:45 a.m., the elevator doors opened and my biological family stepped out. My mother looked small and ruined, her face pale beneath her makeup, clutching my father's arm so hard she left wrinkles in his flannel sleeve. My father, Richard, shuffled in behind her, his eyes locked onto the floor. The old instinct to command the room was entirely gone. He looked like a man carrying an invisible and devastating weight. Uncle Wade came last, flanked by a thin, nervous attorney from a strip mall firm who looked like he had just read his own obituary. We sat across an oval walnut table. The court stenographer adjusted her machine, the small rhythmic clicks counting down the seconds. Margaret Caldwell opened her folder, her silver hair catching the light. We are here today regarding the civil challenge to the Traumin Family Trust. Before we swear in the parties, I believe Mr. Marshall's counsel has a statement." Wade's attorney cleared his throat, his hands trembling as he flipped open his legal pad. "My client wishes to formally withdraw the civil challenge against the successor beneficiary designation. We are prepared to sign a full, unconditional waiver of all claims to the Cedar Lake property, effective immediately." "We accept the withdrawal," Nathan said, his lawyer voice slicing through the room with absolute legal clarity. "But we are not signing a mutual release. My client is pursuing full restitution for the unauthorized lifeworks, and we are submitting a formal referral to the county prosecutor regarding the forged notary stamp on the quitclaim deed." Wade's face went the color of old concrete. "Sarah, please," he stammered, leaning forward, his confident real estate persona completely shattered. "Ridgeline Development is already suing me for breach of contract and fraud. If the DA picks up the forgery charge, it's a felony. I'll lose my license permanently. I was just trying to save your father's store." "You didn't try to save anything, Uncle Wade," I said, my voice level, clinical, and completely devoid of anger. "You saw an asset, you calculated its value, and you assumed I was too quiet to stand up. Facts don't need volume, and they don't change because you're in a corner." Then came the shocking twist none of us expected. My mother, Denise, suddenly shot to her feet, her Cartier bracelet clinking loudly against the walnut table. Her eyes were wide, swollen from crying, and she looked directly at Wade with a fury that could crack glass. "He didn't just try to forge the notary stamp, Sarah," my mother screamed, her voice cracking down the center. "Wade was the one who went into your room 2 years ago. He used a fake inquiry to trace your credentials at the old hospital in Portland. He was hunting you, trying to find any mistake, any disciplinary record to prove you were a fraud so we could dissolve the trust early. He told us you were homeless. He told us you were in rehab. He made us believe you abandoned us so we wouldn't look for you." The conference room went absolutely still. My father stared at his hands, his jaw locked. He had known. He had allowed the lie to become the load-bearing wall of his pride, because admitting his store was failing was worse than admitting he had destroyed his daughter's life. "Is that true, Dad?" I asked, looking across the table at the man who had taught me to ride a bike when I was 6. Richard Marshall opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. For the first time in my adult life, my father had absolutely nothing to say. The silence was doing the work I never could. 5 years of blocked calls, returned priority letters, and ignored emails had never made a dent. But standing here, alive, accomplished, and completely independent, the reality of what they had lost was louder than any accusation. The full climax reached its absolute conclusion when Margaret Caldwell pulled out a final yellow folder from her archives. "Mr. Marshall," Margaret said, addressing my father directly, "per your daughter's instructions, we are not filing criminal charges against you or your wife, but the conditions of your relationship with this estate are absolute. You will sign a written confession detailing the exact fabrication of the store theft lie. You will send it in writing to the entire family group email, all 47 people who were told Sarah was a thief." My mother sank back into her chair, her hands covering her mouth as she sobbed, a small, ruined sound. "Jerry, what have we done?" she whispered to my father. "And furthermore," Nathan added, sliding a document across the table, "you will complete family counseling separately. Apologies expire in this family, boundaries don't. If you want to know your future grandchildren, you start by correcting every single story you broadcasted on Birch Lane. You will not performance play the victim again." My father looked at the paper, then rose slowly from his seat. He looked at me, really looked at me, with an expression that held a devastating war between grief and pride. He gave a single, small, defeated nod. The revenge was complete, but it hadn't come from a scheme or a counterlie. It was the absolute emotional payoff of a life lived fully on my own terms. I didn't need to hurt them to find peace. I just needed to build a shelter they couldn't touch. 1 month later, the closing hook of our story was finalized. My father sent the email on a Wednesday night. Aunt Grace confirmed delivery to all 47 addresses. It was 3 paragraphs long. No excuses, no flowery language, just the raw facts laid bare. He admitted that I had never stolen $1, that I had been systematically locked out of our home, and that the Cedar Lake cabin was legally and rightfully mine. The fallout in our hometown was quiet but permanent. Nobody organized a boycott, but the trust my family had spent 35 years stockpiling was completely gone. The invitations to neighborhood dinners stopped arriving. The whispers at the local market shifted from shamming me to questioning them. No one punished my parents, they just stopped believing them. And for people who built their entire identity on appearances, that was punishment enough. It is Sunday morning now, the first week of February. Light snow is falling outside the kitchen window, the kind that makes everything look like it's being gently forgiven. I am at the stove making French toast. Nathan is grinding coffee beans, singing off-key to the radio, and our dog is stationed under the table, optimistic about crumbs. The doorbell rings. I wipe my hands on a kitchen towel and open the front door. My parents are standing on the porch in their heavy winter coats. My father is holding a bottle of orange juice like he isn't sure what to do with his hands, and my mother has a tin of shortbread cookies, the ones she used to make for every school event of Kelsey, and none of mine. "Hi, Sarah," my mother says, her voice nervous, hopeful, and small. "Come in," I say gently. "The coffee is almost ready." My father steps inside, looking around the kitchen like he's cataloging a house he's never been in, a whole life he almost never knew existed. He clears his throat carefully. "Can I help with anything, Sarah?" I look at him, my father, 62 years old, standing in my kitchen for the first time, asking permission to be useful. "You can set the table, Dad," I say. He nods, goes to the cabinet I point to, and takes out the plates. He counts them out loud, his hands careful, as if they might break if he isn't gentle. 4. 4, I confirm. He sets them down one by one. Nathan hands him a coffee mug. My mother hugs me at the stove, not a dramatic movie hug, just a quiet, heavy hold, her forehead resting against my shoulder for a full minute with no words. It isn't perfect. It isn't the childhood I deserved or the reconciliation movies promise. But it is real, and real is more than I had for a very long time. My name is Sarah Marshall. I am 28 years old, and I am finally, slowly, carefully letting myself be someone's daughter again. 4 plates, it's a start.